Is Warhammer 40k getting you down? Is 10th edition just not as fun for you anymore? Maybe your army got nerfed, or there's just been too many rules changes for you to keep track of, or your favorite units were sent to Legends, and everything's just feeling a little bit too sweaty and intense. You could try a new game, there's plenty out there, but you love the setting of 40k, and you've spent so long building up and lovingly painting your armies that you just don't want to have to start a completely new game that no one near you plays. Especially because you barely have time to get a game in every week, or hell, even every month. So you're stuck playing 40k, as there's absolutely no other game out there that will let you use the models you've already painted in a completely new and streamlined game that's extremely quick to pick up and learn, that will allow you to get through games more quickly and more enjoyably. I think it's about time that we stop worrying about 40k as trying to be a balanced experience and just have fun with it again. And I'm not talking about Crusade this time. Crusade is great and I do love playing it, but there's a lot of things that make it less fun. There's a lot of bookkeeping around it, and some things still do feel kind of imbalanced and just not fun to play around. Recently, Warhammer has released a Horde mode for 40k, which is a great idea and looks like a lot of fun, and I'm really interested in trying it out. And seeing that got me thinking, which is a very dangerous thing for me, that I could make something like that. New, interesting ways to spice up games of 40k that you could try at home. Except completely bare bones, not at all balanced, and honestly devoid of any substance or reason, but hopefully at least still fun. So here are my ideas for fun game types and spins you could put on 40k, or in fact, any war game you play. These ideas will start relatively tame, but will slowly get more insane as I brain dump all the stupid ideas I've wanted to try. So I would be interested in hearing if you think you'll give any of these a go, or if you have any ideas, or have tried any fun things with your gaming group. So let me know in the comments your thoughts, and whilst you're there, subscribe, or become a member, because that's the thing you can do now. Please, subscribe. I need constant validation from internet strangers to fuel my dwindling dopamine. Please subscribe for the love of God. 40k already has some other ways to play. I've mentioned Crusade, but Boarding Actions has just released an update for 10th edition and seems like a really decent way to play. Smaller game types with restricted units, but really interesting interactions with the way the walls and the corridors work. And in some of the White Dwarf magazines, they've released some really cool features to Boarding Actions. Like these tiles, for example, that allow you to shoot bullets around corners by bouncing them off these warp wall things. Well, why not introduce stuff like that to 40k? Come up with some fun terrain features to add something more than just ruins. Have ruins with teleporters in them that allow you to move to another point on the map. Add these boarding action tiles, or take inspiration from something like Helldivers with sandstorms and fire tornadoes. Everyone loved the fire tornadoes, right? If you're old like me, you might remember these templates in Scatter Die. Play a game where each side gets access to an off-screen basilisk, which can bombard the battlefield. At the end of each battle round, each player can fire a basilisk and choose a place on the battlefield, then roll the scatter die, and whatever is there gets hit. I'll use a scatter die for the fire tornado, set up the largest template in the middle. In each round, it moves based on the scatter die, and anything it moves through, or anything that moves through it, takes damage or is slowed. Or make the objectives do something other than just be objectives. Again, White Dwarf has introduced some fun missions, so go wild with thinking of fun ideas for what to do to make the actual objective game more interesting. Maybe you're in a position where it seems like every game is decided after just 2 or 3 rounds. Either too many casualties on one side, or the points differential becomes just too astronomical for you to be able to catch up. Video games have kind of already solved this problem. When the objective game is just not as fun anymore, the most fun thing to do is kill. So introducing, quite simply, Team Deathmatch. When a unit dies, it goes into strategic reserves and can come back on the board in your next reinforcement step. You can either play just straight up 5 rounds, most kill wins, or still feed this into an objective game, so it feels like King of the Hill or Oddball style game types, where you have a unit carry an objective, and the longer they do it, the better, or even capture the flag. Any of these classic first-person shooter game modes, but where units dying is merely a setback. You can play around with how the reserves actually work. You could have it so reserves can come back near objectives that you control, or you can have it so it always is forced to respawn in your own deployment zone, so that extending more into your opponent's side has harsher punishment. Whatever you think might be more fun or interesting, as long as the shooting never stops. If you're like me, finding time to play games is tricky, and there's a lot of games you want to try. Usually when I play, we're playing one game and that's our lot, and even if we've got a weekend game in, we don't generally have time to try multiple different games. So for efficiency's sake, why play one game when you could play 2 at once? I've had this idea in my head for some time of playing a game of 40k and a game of Gaslands simultaneously on the same map, where both games can actually interact with each other. Imagine you set up a race course for Gaslands, then set up a 40k board around it, and then play a round of each game back and forth. Wouldn't this take as much time as just playing one game then the other in sequence? Yes. In fact, it would probably take longer because you're having to work out how the 2 games you pick would interact with each other. This is my stupid video, so I say this is just better. For the Gaslands 40k combo, there are interactions like, say your opponent is getting ahead in Gaslands and you can't quite catch up. Well, during 40k, you can just move a Dreadnought onto the track right in the car's path. Is there a squad that's hiding behind a ruin that you just can't quite get to? Drive a truck into them and see what happens. You can decide how things interact either as they come up or decide beforehand which interactions you deem will work and will not work. Just start combining games and see what happens. I've also had a bunch of ideas about making the dice a key element in the way the game is played, beyond how they're already, the medium in which all interactions are decided. But if you love the way that RNG plays into wargaming, you'll love adding RNG to the RNG. Or maybe that's just me, because I just have a thing for randomization. There are two main ideas with dice that I want to explore. And the first is changing how the dice work during the game. You can play a standard game of 40k, but at the start of each battle round, you roll to see how the dice are actually going to work that battle round. So an example for how this might work is on a 1, the dice are unlucky. Anything that isn't a 6 counts as a 1. On a 2 or 5, the dice are normal. On a 3 or 4, the dice are purely average. You no longer roll dice, you just take what is mathematically the average. And then on a 6, the dice are lucky, and it's the opposite of the 1, where everything that isn't a 1 counts as a 6. You now have this additional knowledge of knowing what the dice are going to be like, so you don't have to worry about the dice screwing you over, which they have done to me many times recently. This idea is very daft, and will likely lead to things just being even more unbalanced if you manage to go first and have good lines of sight when the dice turn lucky, but you should have played around that, so it sounds like a skill issue. And honestly, this is something that I've been wanting to experiment with anyway. Like, how does the game change if you know how your luck is going to actually be? If you were going into a game knowing you were going to be super lucky or super unlucky, would that change the way you play? Or alternatively, instead of doing it the way I've suggested, you could have it so whatever you roll at the start of the bat round is just the number every die will be. So rolling a 3 means everything is 3s. The other idea in the dice category is to hide all the dice roll, and now it becomes a game of social deduction, like a liar's dice 40k. You have a dice tray, you hide it in some way, and whenever you roll, neither player will know what is rolled. Instead, as the active player who rolled, you decide how well you did. But if your opponent isn't happy with that, they can call you out. You then look at the roll. If you overestimated your luck, your entire roll is void. But if you underestimated, you actually rolled better than you said, then you get the roll result instead. So, for example, you could say, oh, well, out of my 10 rolls, all of them hit. But your opponent is likely to call bullshit, and then you're going to get nothing. But you could say, well, out of my 10 rolls, only 1 of them hit. Whilst that's likely to be true, I'm pretty sure your opponent will also be fine with that. It becomes a game of trying to push your luck just to the line where your opponent has to take a risk to catch you out. Or you can play it safe and take some guaranteed damage, but because you underestimate your luck, that might fall you behind the curve. Maybe in a tight spot, you can call out a clearly undercalled roll, and hey, if you're lucky, they might have rolled even worse than what they said. This one feels less chaotic and more adding an additional tactical thought on top of already the tactical thoughts, but it might be a fun thing to try. How would you handle stuff like rerolls in this scenario? I have no idea. Now, my final idea, I think, is probably the most insane. And if you made it this far, then well done. And if you just click through this part of the video because the chapter title for the section of the YouTube video sounded interesting, hello. This final idea is the Thanos snap. Play a standard game of 40k, or whatever your game of choice is, and at the end of the first battle round, take a picture of the game state. Then Thanos snaps his fingers. Each army loses half of their units. For each unit, roll to see if they get snapped, until you've removed units equal to half of the total points value for the army. So for a 2k point game, each side loses 1k points of units, and reserves are not safe from the power of the Infinity Gauntlet. The picture is important to know where these models and units were before they got yeeted into the void. Then, roll 2d6. That many battle rounds later, those units or models will return to the battlefield as close to that position as they can. Now, you're probably asking, whoa, Paul, 2d6? The game only lasts 5 rounds. What if that number is higher than 4? Then they return in your next game. Let's say you rolled a 7. Well, at the end of your next game in battle round 3, each side will suddenly have units appear, and then you play on. Perhaps you're playing with different armies, and now you have to work out whether they're cooperating with your new friends, or you're starting to play 2 armies with different goals. You can even go a step further if you have a group to play with. As long as everyone's okay with it, you can have 2 other people play a game on that same terrain setup. Then the original players have to continue their previous game with the other half of their army whilst intermingling with the new game that's going on. Massively chaotic, but a fun way to just make a really silly game that gets more people involved. Maybe you can start negotiating with the other players to help each other out as you try to win your respective games, or maybe it just becomes a massive free-for-all. You decide. But these are the kind of insane ideas I have in my head, and what are your thoughts? Are these ideas any good? No, probably not, but are they fun? I have no idea. They sound it, and I like to think if you're looking to have a really silly time, not to have to worry about the meta or tactics or playing a balanced, nuanced tabletop game, then these ideas might be right up your alley. But let me know what you think, and thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this, go like and subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. And if you really enjoyed this, you can now become a member. Like all of these people here. Look at all these good names. Look at this guy in particular. Thank you very much for all the people who have decided to become members, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.